Established over 100 years ago, Watkins Books is one of the world's oldest and leading independent bookshops specializing in esoterica. We have the widest selection of esoteric books in the UK, and our friendly and knowledgeable staff are here to assist you in a unique ambience of our shop. So come and visit us in the heart of London as we're open every day.
The comments and views expressed on The Moore Show are those of the people that make them and do not necessarily reflect the view of Kevin Moore, The Moore Show, or this radio station and its affiliate or sponsors. This show is for entertainment purposes only.
Broadcasting from Amsterdam and across the world online. You're now watching The Moore Show and I'm your host, Kevin Moore. For the next hour, I'll be covering subjects that will open up your mind and provide you with information you may have never heard before. On today's show, I'm about to be joined with my guest, Philip Mantle. Now, Philip is the former Director of Investigations for the British UFO Research Association. He is the Mutual UFO Network's representative for England and is an honorary member of the Research Institute on Anomalous Phenomena in the Ukraine. He is also an international lecturer on the subject of UFOs and has also worked for a variety of TV and radio companies around the world. Philip Mantle, welcome to the show.
My pleasure, Kevin. Nice to speak to you again.
Yeah, it's nice to speak to you again as well. I was just thinking, as we were speaking off air there, actually it's been, you did come on before, and I'll link the previous interview where you came on before. I mean, but we're talking, God, this was 7 years ago, I think.
It's quite a while back, Kevin, yes. Again, I couldn't put a figure on it like yourself. I know it's a few years ago, yeah. I'm plodding along nicely, Kevin. Health-wise, I've not been at my best. I think that's sort of well known to people that know me. But apart from that, I cannot grumble, really.
Good. Okay. And there are those in this field that are getting older, unfortunately. I was speaking to someone yesterday about the physicist Stanton Friedman, which I am going to get on the show. He's in his very early 80s right now, and he's stopped, doing any active work in the field as much as he's sort of talking about the cases and his sort of stance on the phenomena. But with yourself, how have you been in the sense of with your health and everything, with sort of active investigation? I mean, do you still get cases coming to you?
Absolutely, Kevin. I mean things have changed down the years, because when I first started, not as long ago as Stan Friedman, I might add.
No, of course not. No, I'll just as an example of yeah.
It's pre-internet days, and when I started, there was no shortcuts. You could speak to people on the phone, and there was one or two that had a fax, but you mostly did it either in writing or in person. But of course, things have changed now greatly. Whilst again in the beginning, my investigations were fairly localized, I would say, to my surrounding area, and then it expanded somewhat. But now, of course, the boundaries are broken in that respect, and things cross my desk from many different parts of the world, Kevin. For example, I don't have to leave my office, but I am helping with a photographic case in Brazil. As we speak, it has been the photograph in question is being analysed, and I'm sort of the man in the middle. I'm not a photo analyst, but they've requested my help, and I've done that. So yes, I'm still active, and also like Stan, one of the things you can do when ill health does sort of limit you physically, Kevin, it gives you the opportunity to look back on some of the material you dealt with before, or perhaps you'd completely forgotten about, and I'm not putting myself in the same category as Stan, but I've got filing cabinets right next to me now full of case histories. And one of the nice things is that I've been able to get these out and have a rummage through them and think, oh boy, I'd completely forgotten about this particular case. So there's 3 or 4 that are on my desk now from different time periods that I've gone back and tried to recontact the witnesses to see if anything else has happened since then, or was it a one-off, and what their thoughts are now they've had 5, 10, 15, 20 years to digest it. And to my amazement, my first inquiry to a gentleman down in the Midlands, he phoned me up as soon as he got my letter. And he said, no, Philip, there's a lot more happened since then, but I'd like to talk to you later. So that's one of the things that I'm following up. Because I read his initial encounter and I thought, that is fascinating. And much to my surprise, my first letter, and I got my first response. Other letters as yet haven't been responded to. That's probably because they've moved, Kevin, and it's going to be hard tracking them down. But if I could get, say, a 1 out of 10 success rate, I'd be quite happy with that. I mean, the first one was the most interesting one as far as I'm concerned anyway. So I'm quite happy to carry on looking into that. And of course, when I'm finished with it, I'll look at trying to publish that either in a magazine or online or wherever. So investigations are ongoing, old and new.
Well, that's interesting. Okay, so you've got, as you say, past cases that or cold cases as you're that's sort of resurfacing, because that's where it's taking you right now, which is fascinating as well. You've got some new cases, but in a bigger, broader sense, obviously you've got your finger on the pulse a little bit. Where is ufology nowadays? Is there still the sightings, mass solar sightings that are still going on? Is it very much mixed with fake? Videos and pictures that are out there now, and it sort of messed the sort of whole research up a little bit? Has it stagnated? I mean, where is it? New cases?
It's stagnated, Kevin. It's changed. I mean, you're right. You hit on an interesting aspect there, is hoaxes. And that's mainly photographic stroke video clips. I mean, there's some certain companies that are well known, and they pump these out like no tomorrow. So, if you just learn to ignore that kind of thing. That's one of the aspects that's fascinating with looking at the cold cases, because they weren't hoaxes in the first place. The photographs weren't made on Photoshop or whatever, because it didn't exist in those days, So, and it has changed. And like I said, I was amazed when I first really got up and running was the 1980s. And I was part of the Yorkshire UFO Society with Graham Birdsall and his brother Mark Birdsall. And our office was Mark Birdsall's home, his flat. And I was always amazed at how people found us in those days, Kevin, to report their sightings to us. I mean, we made ourselves as visible as possible with local news media and leaflets and that kind of thing. But you couldn't just go online and find out where to report it, because the internet didn't exist. And there was a time, I would say sort of early to mid-1980s, that we were almost overrun with cases that were coming in. But now it's different, of course. It's things have changed. People report stuff online. It's not in your face all the time, and it's not perhaps in the mainstream, but it's just changed. And of course, if anyone's been involved in the UFO subject for any length of time, Kevin, you'll notice that the subject itself, or I should say the things that are reported, have changed. They've evolved, for example. I mean, nowadays we have lots of those so-called flying triangle reports. And when it comes down to the close encounters, we don't have the Space Brothers anymore like we did in the 1950s. So it has changed, it's evolved, and continues to do so. And as a result, remains ever fascinating. It's not stagnated, it's changed. And I'm fortunate in some respects to have access to a lot of material. And there's times, Kevin, when I thought, well, you think you've heard it all, and then hey presto, something, lands in your inbox or pops through your letterbox, and you thought, well, blow me down. I've never ever seen anything like that or heard anything like that before. And that's one of the things that keeps my interest and keeps me going.
Prior to getting into ufology, you always had an interest in the alternative, in a sense. I believe that when you were younger, you did go to a few spiritualist churches.
Absolutely, Kevin. I mean, I was always interested in what we'd loosely call the paranormal. I can't put any trigger points that brought me into it. As a young lad, I was interested in astronomy, the space program, horror films, anything paranormal, anything sort of out of the box. Girls and football were a bit further down the list, And being interested in these subjects wasn't one for getting a girlfriend at school, I can assure you. It didn't make you a kick magnet by any. It had the opposite effect. But, I mean, just over the road was my best friend's grandmother, and I used to go to the spiritualist church with her. And at high school, Kevin, in my day, we had one lesson a week called religious instruction, not education, but instruction. And I can remember the teacher, I've forgotten his name, but he was a fearsome man with a beard. And it was, this is the Bible. It wasn't a church school, by the way. It was just an ordinary high school. This is the Bible, and this is it. And I was one of the people that would put my hand up and say, well, excuse me, sir, but that doesn't quite make sense to me. And I got into trouble for it. So I think I was about 13 or 14, and I spent a year reading the Bible from cover to cover, just to make sure, when I asked these questions, if I got into trouble, if I got a smack round the lug, I know what I was getting it for. And I don't know anybody else of my age at that time in my school that would have done that or had similar interests. And I was always the kind of chap, and still am, is if there was a button that said don't press, I'd want to press it to find out what happened. I'll give you an example, Kevin. Many, many years later, when I was working, I spent most of my working life as a technician in a factory. And one of my colleagues was showing me how to work this particular plant that I hadn't worked on before. And I won't bore you with the details, but he said, when this comes through here, you lift that and you lift that, and you leave this roller lifted for 17 seconds, and then you put it back down. And I said, yeah, great. Why 17 seconds? And he says, do you know, Philip? He said, I've been teaching lads to work this plant for 10 years. You're the first one that's ever asked that. So he explained it to me. So I always had that inquiring mind, Kevin. When I first joined the Yorkshire UFO Society, I was sat at, and I wasn't content to allow others to tell me what was happening. I wanted to find out for myself, hence me getting more involved. And I'm still the same now. So those early interests, I still take a passing interest in astronomy when I can, and still love the occasional horror film, but UFOs rose to the top of the pile, so to speak, and has remained so. Yeah, a long history.
Okay, then that's interesting. So you've got a whole broad spectrum of interest in the field. It's not just ufology. There's the whole other side to this as well. Even you could use the word consciousness in a sense. You've sort of delved into that and probably do consider that sometimes, that subject. I think we all do consider our mortality. Okay, so who is Philip Mantle now then, and in respects to what this phenomena is all these years later? You must have some truth that you've come up with yourself. I mean, just to say you don't know or you have no clue what this really is, do you have any feeling or any intuitiveness on what this could be?
As a young man, when I became first involved, I was about 21 years old. It's when I seriously got involved. I had no doubt that UFOs were alien spacecraft coming to visit us from wherever, and set out to try and prove that to myself, not to anyone else. My involvement in ufology, Kevin, was always a personal thing. If I came to the conclusion that UFOs were X, and nobody else agreed with me, I don't really care, because I'm happy to share whatever information I've gleaned down the years, but the conclusion is mine and mine alone. And as I said to you, if you're a student of the subject, you will notice that the subject has changed dramatically down the years.
Yeah.
So, I mean, next year it's 70 years of flying saucers. It's 70 years since Kenneth Arnold. And it's changed very much from those innocent days in the late 1940s, when Kenneth Arnold himself didn't know what these things were. In the 1950s, we had the Space Brothers. 1960s, it was something else, and so on. So the subject has evolved. So if it was aliens visiting Earth, coming from A to B, however, either physically or through another dimension or a black hole, for me, it doesn't really add up, because we used to have the Space Brothers. They were here to help us. They were nice and pretty, the Nordics with blonde hair. Who lived on the dark side of the moon, according to Adamski and co. Of course, when our technology expanded and we could see the dark side of the moon, we found that was incorrect. Oh, well, no, really, they didn't come from the dark side of the moon. They came from Venus. So again, when our technology expanded and we found that Venus is a horrible place, you cannot live there, oh, well, they really came from, Neptune, or, and so on. And then it became Zeta Reticuli, and then it's further and further out. If you also look at the close encounter sightings where there's entities involved, they pretty much come here, Kevin, and how can I put it, not so politely, they just mess about. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And they also just happen to be humanoid, like you and I, head, 2 arms, 2 legs. Not only is there one type of humanoid, the last I looked, there was probably dozens. So are they coming from dozens of different planets? When you look at the size of the universe, how the hell would they find us in the first place? So if one species did, Kevin, fine. But, there's lots of them. And they're all pretty much humanoid, but when you look at the diversity of life on this planet, it's everything you can think of. So, the ETH, in essence, doesn't really fit what people are reporting and the evidence. For example, as well, you'll have one landing case that will leave marks afterwards. So, yeah, it's physical, it's nuts and bolts, it's burnt the grass or dented it or left a hole or whatever. Then you'll have another one that doesn't even bend a blade of grass. It's almost, in inverted commas, paranormal, like a ghost will walk through a wall and not leave a mark. Also, you have the close encounters, and I've investigated some of these, where it's a bright sunny day, 3 or 4 people see this thing on the ground and get quite close to it, there's humanoids, and off it goes. Nobody else sees it, Kevin. And I mean, nobody. This is a built-up area. One case that I investigated personally, I know the area. It's a built-up area. There's motorways either side of it. Not a thing. How come? How come? It seems that the experience was located in that one area and that one area alone.
And the experience was meant for just those that had the experience with it.
It was meant for,
now,
all I'm saying is, we're jumping to a conclusion there, you see. All I'm saying is that it seems it was apparently there. Now, I'll give you another example. If we go to the Rendlesham Forest case, which is supposedly Britain's best case, well, it's Britain's best known case anyway. If you take the first encounters by the patrol with Jim Penniston and John Burroughs, they went into the forest, they were the first there, they left a colleague further back, and they encountered this thing in the forest. I have no doubt that they did have, in inverted commas, a close encounter. However, Jim Penniston describes this triangular craft with red lights on the top, blue lights underneath, and these strange insignia on it. And he touched it and he walked around it for 45 minutes. His colleague, John Burroughs, who is only a matter of feet away, just sees some strange lights. Doesn't see Burroughs walk around, doesn't see him touch it. Now, how come? How come? Was it a physical object or was it lights? They are two very, very different things, Kevin. It's all right, you can say, well, I saw five different shapes on it, but my pal only saw 4, but that didn't happen. They both saw something entirely different, but yet these 2 men were only a few yards apart. How come?
Well, that's a bit like my UFO experience with my family. back in, I think it was 91, 92. It was when the Freddie Mercury rock concert tribute was on at Wembley, and it was that day. And you know, as a family, we don't really talk about it, and when we do, it's just there's no reference for it. So it's almost like it's beyond our, you know, there's nothing comparable to that experience that we can even, you know, bring into the conversation. Yet I know what I saw, and as a family we all saw something a little bit different. As a family, the events are all a little bit different as well. So
well, can I ask, I mean, the difference between a little bit different, and I would expect, let's say you and I and your family were standing by the side of the road and a bus went past. If we all saw a bus, we'd all describe it slightly different. You know, say, oh, I saw 3 passengers downstairs and 2 upstairs. And the guy said, no, I saw 4. But you'd all basically see the same thing with slight differences. But with Rendlesham, it was entirely different.
And these are military personnel. Let's just remind people of that as well. You know,
that's all that really matters. And so how come? How come they both?
Yeah. Well, okay. So then let's look at some. You know, let's look at what the phenomena. It's still sticking with that question in a sense of what your perception after all these years is. When you look at some of the researchers and pioneers in this field. Now, I'm going to pull up some names here. Okay, so Dr. Stephen Greer. He's got his particular way of doing what he's doing. You know, with contact, what's he called it? There's a word he called it, isn't there? And I've forgotten it. It's extreme. It's contact, basically. He's using, you know, initiating contact through channeling. And there's lots of channelers out there now having their own contact with different races, apparently. There is many different researchers like David Jacobs who have gone down the hybrid phenomena, the abduction phenomena, and how dangerous this phenomena is, because the people that come to him, you know, have been taken against their will. The list could go on and on. There's a whole heap of different researchers out there with different clients that come to them with a different take on the whole phenomena. And what you've said there as well, you know, how people in one location can see it so differently and no one else sees these experiences. It's as though it's, you know, narrowed down just to those particular people. And I know, as you would say, that's, you know, that's putting it in a box in a way, because, you know, but what is it? This is the thing. I mean, are we dealing with something here? Have you been researching something for 30 years that we're no closer to from the day you started? And for most people in this field, it's unobtainable what this is, this phenomena.
I would say no. I think the answer's right under our noses. Regarding, you know, people being selected, I think it's the other way around. I think it's the location in which the people are that is the important thing, and not necessarily the individuals. Because there also is on record a couple of other contact cases where it's the individuals had an experience, and they're not lying, Kevin, they're not off their head, but yet there was somebody actually viewing them and could see nothing. So the experience was personal to them. If you also look at Robert Taylor from the Livingston incident in the late 1970s, one of the things that people forget about his encounter, and for those who don't know, he was a forestry worker, went to work one morning in this clearing, came across this dome-shaped object with a flange around it, and these 2 walls with spikes rolled towards him, came up the side of him and he passed out. However, in that narrative, they forget that Mr. Taylor, and I have met him in person and interviewed him, said that this dome was transparent in certain portions, but that transparency moved. So it wasn't like the dome was all transparent. The transparency moved at times, and it's an aspect of it that has been sort of forgotten. Now, my take on things, I used to be an old friend of mine called Albert Budden from London. Albert wrote a couple of books, and basically we're looking at earth lights that are electromagnetically charged. I'm going to try and put it in a simple term because I am not a scientist. If you get too close to them, Kevin, you can have a close encounter, but it doesn't necessarily happen to everybody. It affects you. And in today's society, we generate our own electromagnetism through mobile telephone masts. The Earth produces it naturally as well. Hence, if you're in the location where one of these electromagnetic things are, and you are hypersensitive to it, in other words, you could be allergic to it, depends on you as an individual, as whether A, you have an experience with it, whether it affects you or not, and if you do, what you perceive. That's why perhaps in some so-called window areas, it's been termed, there are a whole plethora of manifestations. We will have paranormal, we'll have ghosts, we'll have, cryptos, we'll have UFO. I'll give you another example. Mark Birdsall and I went to a very, very small village in North Yorkshire, in the Yorkshire Dales, so small that the houses didn't have numbers on. And we were looking for Mr. Whatever at number so-and-so, but there were no numbers. So we knocked on this door to ask for directions. And we asked the lady at the door, can you tell us where Mr. So-and-so lives? She says, have you come about the ghost dog? What ghost dog? She said, well, down the village path on such and such a night, we see these two red lights going down the village. Now, to them, these were the eyes, the terrible eyes of the ghost dog. But in reality, all they actually saw was these two red lights. So here you have where we were going to look at this UFO report in the same area. And if you dig a little deeper, Kevin, we did find other paranormal activity. There was witchcraft practice nearby and so on. So it's not necessarily the people, but it can be the location itself. If we also look at Hessdalen in Norway, that's why we'll have hotspots around the world. We'll have these window areas in many different parts of the world. The answer could be that we've been looking in the wrong direction, Kevin. It is quite literally under our feet. And that's why when you go back, take ufology out of it for a while, go back down the decades, it's not that long ago that people weren't seeing the little 3 foot high, 4 foot high creatures with big black eyes, but they were seeing other paranormal creatures that did pretty much the same kind of things to them. I mean, there's one folklore tale that I was told about where, the master's going home on a night and he's got his servant behind him. Of course, the master's on the horse. He gets fed up of waiting for the servant because he's on foot. So he trots along, gets home. He thought, the servant won't be far behind me. It was several hours before he turned up when he said to him, where have you been? Well, master, I was abducted by these fairies who took me to a fairy mound that was illuminated by lamps that I couldn't see. And I was only there 5 minutes. Well, you've been gone 3 hours. Now, what does that sound like if we were to tell that story today? So it's the area, the locations. These can change, of course, rather than the people themselves.
Well, okay, let's just go to the area then to answer the question, or try to answer the question. Okay, so we know that with crop circles, there seems to be areas where there's energy lines or ley lines going through. There's something to do with the concentration of these crop formations. So that could be location rather than what the phenomena is. It's based on and they're near ancient sites as well. A lot of them. Well, what's that say about the location then for the UFO phenomena that we're discussing? Could that be there's some sort of portal, ripping dimensions or something? I mean, is it again beyond our understanding of why that phenomena takes? Because when you look at the UFO phenomena as well and actual real footage, you see these crafts just blimp in and blimp out of our reality.
Yeah, well, I think what we're looking at is when we talk, we've labelled it under the banner of Earthlights. And I think we're looking at a rare, very rare form of natural phenomena that as yet is not accepted by science today. We have locations around the world where we see these things all the time. Hest Island in Norway, the Pennine Hills of England, the Min Min Lights in Australia, Martha Lights in Texas, ad infinitum. And when you look around these areas, you have the sightings, you have the folklore as well that goes with it. The Min Min Lights, of course, comes from the Aboriginal name for them, you know, so they're not a new phenomenon. When it comes to crop circles, I don't give them the time of day. I think they're all hoaxes. Absolutely every single one of them. That's just my opinion. Ancient sites were built on specific locations. They're not like, you know, wimpy homes that they put up today. They'll stick them anywhere they can. So maybe they knew about these areas because, you know, they were at home sat watching EastEnders. They knew more about the environment that we're talking about. So I think the answer may well lie within the earth rather than, you know, within the heavens, Kevin. But I may well be wrong. But it is just a conclusion that I've tentatively come to down the years. I would never rule out the ET idea. I would never rule it out because if you look at any form of any branch of science, they've ruled many things out down the years, and of course they've got it down well wrong. You know, I would proceed with caution with it. But for me, however you want to explore it, whether it's a space vehicle coming physically from A to B, or coming through a dimension or a wormhole, whatever, it doesn't add up. As you pointed out yourself, you mentioned different researchers who all come to a different conclusion why these things are happening. When it comes to film, I think it's, you know, reliable film footage is pathetic. I mean, we all have pretty much in the Western world, you know, a mobile phone that's got a camera on it. Have you ever seen one decent film of an alien? One? I don't think you have, Kevin. You might have seen some blurry images that are allegedly, but and then, you know, the people who claim these encounters, or not necessarily the people, but the researchers saying, well, you know, the aliens won't allow us it to be filmed and they put out a force field or whatever, which is just nonsense. You know, if they come in here physically, then they you know, they abide by the same laws of physics as we do, Kevin. It's one of the things that is probably universal, is the laws of physics, and that's it. So it just doesn't add up. It just does not add up. And I don't care who disagrees with me. That's just my conclusion.
But all I know is what I saw as a kid was solid. It was silver. It was round. It was hovering. And it wasn't a light.
It's how you perceived it, Kevin. I mean, there's a big difference about.
There is, but true. But I can't take away the fact of what I actually saw.
Not doubt.
And I could easily talk myself out of it because it's beyond my conceptualization of what that was. But it wasn't. It was It was solid. It was physical, and it did happen. That's all I know.
Yeah. I mean, I'll give you an example. My late mum was from Northern Ireland, and in her youth and in her teens, they lived in a very, very rural part of Ireland at the time. And she told me as a young girl, they had a stream on the farm, and she used to often go down by the stream and play. Because they lived miles from nowhere. And she told me that she met a fairy. It was a female fairy. She conversed with it. This fairy says, I'll give you a little bottle, and if you drink from it, then you'll never have an accident. So she did. Now, she told me this story, she wasn't making it up. My mother was a religious person, didn't, invent stories.
Yep.
Do I believe her? Yes. Do I believe in fairies? No. But her, what she saw that day was real. It was a fairy, complete with wings and pretty dresses, But was it real? Do we have fairies? I believe her, but I don't believe in fairies. I believe you. I've had a couple of sightings myself. I believe you and others like you, Kevin. But what we see and what was actually there are two completely different things. I'll give you another example, Chuck.
Yeah, and I can't go back in time to,
But I'll give you an example. I got a gentleman contact me, said, I've seen this thing. And what we used to do, if we couldn't get to see them, we would send them a UFO sighting report form in the post. This is pre-internet days again. I sent it with a first-class return envelope. It came back within a couple of days, and it filled all the information in. And there was this fabulous drawing of a dome-shaped flying saucer with, giving off lights. But he said he'd seen it on several occasions. So I rang him up. He didn't live that far from me. It's just that I was working and I couldn't get there.
Cool.
And I said, if you see this thing again, please phone me. Doesn't matter what time or day or night it is. I'll get in the car and I'll come. Anyway, he did. It was, I don't know, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. He phoned me. I got in my car, drove there. And this was an intelligent guy. He was a local property owner. Nice house. And I said, right, is it still there? And he said, yeah. And I goes out into the back garden and he pointed to it, and it was the planet Venus, you know. But yet to him, and his drawing of this dome-shaped flying saucer, you know, that's what it looked like to him. And I said, well, you are really seeing something extraterrestrial. It's the planet Venus. Now, had I not lived nearby, Kevin, and been able to get to see him, all we had was the paper in front of us, you know. And I phoned the air.
No, it's a good point. It's a good point you raised. No, absolutely. And I think it's healthy to inject this into anyone's reality that's had a sighting, because it just helps. But
just let me say the next story, Kevin, because it's slightly different. It's paranormal. Now, my ex-wife was very interested in the paranormal and UFOs, and we used to go all over together. I was invited to London to one of the national newspapers, and I won't mention any names, but it's one of the big ones, to discuss writing a feature for them, and a main double-page spread. So off we goes, me and my ex-wife Sue, down to London, into the building, through security, and this was the assistant editor we were meeting, and we were led up to his office. He wasn't there to begin with, and we got a cup of coffee. 10 minutes later, he turns up, and he says, "Oh, nice to meet you." And he says, "Have you had lunch yet?" I said, "No." So off we goes to the executive dining room. We're having lunch, and it was unusual for my wife not to have a chat. I mean, she was a very sociable lady, but she sat there quiet. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, she says, "Excuse me, Mr. So-and-so." Again, I'm not going to give his name. I call him Smith. She says, did you know somebody called Josh? And he looked at us, his face dropped, Kevin, and he muttered a few words. And anyway, we finished lunch and we went back to his office, and he said, "Who have you been talking to about me?" I said, "Nobody, we only arrived 10 minutes before we met you." So he said to my wife, "Where did you get the word Josh from?" She said, "Well, I could just see it across your forehead in big letters." And he says, "I don't know." And he said, and he started crying. This fella had tears in his eyes. And he says that was an ex-girlfriend, but that wasn't her real name. That was my sort of pet name for her. And she died many years ago. And he was astounded. And I have no explanation for that, Kevin. You know, it did as well, because I got the feature assignment and it paid very nicely, thank you. But
yeah, well, you know what? Again, what if that was supposed to come through for her, unbeknown to her, so that you would get that feature? I mean, you could look at it like that. But yeah, so there's something that happened to you with a woman that you knew very, very well, and that was a real phenomena, and it's absolutely unexplainable.
Well, I can't explain it. I'm not saying it's unexplainable. All I'm saying is I have no logical explanation.
Well, unexplainable on this sense, but on this level. But if we look at it with different eyes, which I always do, I would say, well, she was just tuning in. She was tuning in.
Whatever.
You know, it's my truth that we are consciousness within a container called a body, and we're here having an earthly experience. So for me, I would look at it from that. I don't know if you can look at it from that perspective. I don't know if going to the spiritualist church ever changed your mind about that you're more than just your mind?
No, I didn't. I quite the opposite. I don't think they're all hoaxes or anything like that. Most of them are not, Kevin. They're genuine people and have a genuine belief. For me, I mean, I'm one of those, unfortunately, who's through ill health has literally, shook hands with the Grim Reaper on 2 or 3 occasions. And I managed to escape his grasp, but I don't look upon us as a spiritual being. I look upon us as a clever animal. We're part of the animal kingdom, and at the moment we rule the roost.
Would you be surprised then if when you do leave this planet, as we all are. It's okay. We can talk about this when you do. That actually it continues, and it's actually that would be okay, wouldn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's one of those things you hope you're wrong about, but that's just the way I viewed things. I mean, again, I've been in contact with a very well-known person within ufology, or he certainly was. And again, I'm not going to mention his name, but if I did, there are people out there who would know who he was. And he's been a long study of spirituality and consciousness, and I think he's done sort of religious studies for over 50 years. In religious, I don't just mean the Bible and so on, religious studies in general. And he's come to pretty much a similar conclusion that the universe is a living entity, and we are part of it, and that when we die, yes, our physical body dies and goes back in the ground to nutrify the ground, but our spirit, if you want for a better word, carries on. It's still part of this universal whole, and it's fascinating. I'm still discussing it with him, but I'm not saying I agree with him. But
what if that is some of the key to the answer of the phenomena of this unexplainable phenomena? What if we are missing, and everyone? No. What if there was not one book out there, in all the books out there of consciousness, ufology, and any paranormal phenomena that was right, and actually the actual truer picture is unbeknown to us still,
Kevin,
until when we cross over.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not of the opinion that we cross over to anywhere, but what I would say is that it could. You're right I would agree with you in a lot of respects. Is that whatever the answer to the UFO phenomena is, it could well be that we just don't know. And not that we don't know, but that we are not capable as a species of knowing. Could be right in front of us now, and we wouldn't be able to recognize it for what it is. It's like if you take a flat screen TV and stick it on the floor and cover it in ants, there's no way they would be able to recognize that as a flat screen TV.
That's exactly it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point. Or giving that TV to someone just even 100 years ago, it would still be like, well, what the hell is this in one sense?
Or giving it to my sister in Australia because she couldn't even work the answer machine, let alone a computer.
Right. Well, yeah. It's the same thing that it's almost godlike, some of the technology we have now compared to what was back in the day, and so okay. Well, we're not far off in what we in where we're coming from on this. None of us are saying we have the answers. Because that would be coming from ego, and I'm not going. We don't, and well, the proof is there that we don't. But I do like what you have to say. At least you've got your own truth on it. But then, what happens when something like Roswell happens? I had Donald Schmidt on just a few weeks ago. The interview's already on my channel. And he's interviewed first-hand witnesses who were there, and they're all saying the same thing: bodies were recovered. Now, I know you could say, but these could have been crash test dummies or whatever, but this is not what they're saying. This is still going to line with.
I've been out to Roswell. I've been out in the depth where these events supposedly took place, and again, let's look at Roswell as a whole. To start with, when you get the press release and what Marcel said and what Marcel Jr. said, and I met Marcel Jr., is basically we have some wreckage. That's what we have. But then it ends up that we have today a cosmic Watergate. Well, how did it get from this bunch of wreckage in the desert to a cosmic Watergate? The same goes with the Rendlesham Forest incident. Again, go back to the beginning. They were called out because there were some lights in the forest that they thought might have been an aircraft that had come down. And we end up now, over, 30 plus years later, with a flaming time machine. Now, how did it get from a few lights to a time machine, Kevin? There's something that doesn't add up in amongst all that. What happens with cases like this, and most ufologists like to pigeonhole things. This is ufology, that's paranormal, that's folklore, that's legend, ad infinitum. when in reality it's not. They are all mixed together. Roswell is a prime example of it. It has now become myth and legend. And if we go on for another few hundred years, it will expand, it will look back, and it will be looked upon like today, that we look back on things like Robin Hood. As a kid, I was convinced Robin Hood was a real man. I was very disappointed as a teenager when I grew up to find out, no, he wasn't. But yet, where I live now, I can take you in half an hour to his grave. There is Robin Hood's grave. Do you know where it is?
Actually, I don't know. Where is it?
And it's nowhere near Sherwood Forest. So it's not far from Brighouse, actually, in West Yorkshire, because he died at Kirklees Abbey. That's where he fired the arrow from. Now, Kirklees is the council area for Huddersfield, Batley, Brighouse, Cleckheaton, and so forth around there. And his grave is on a private land just next to the motorway, just outside of Brighouse. You can't go out. I've been to Little John's grave at Hathersage in Derbyshire, but you know, they didn't exist. Neither did King Arthur. But there are those that are still looking for King Arthur's castle, the Holy Grail. So again, when it comes to things, I'm not saying there wasn't some basis for people like Robin Hood. You know, because of where his grave is, there was a Robin Hood society. But what it looked like, it could have been several outlaws. And from that, this one myth has grown, this one legend has grown into one. Well, he's running around in nice green tights and he's such a great guy. Well, in reality, it wasn't that. And it's the same with Roswell. Something definitely happened, but it's now grown and grown and will continue to grow. And no disrespect to Don, you know, I've had Don as a speaker at one of my conferences. You know, if ufology in America is very different, and we won't go into the Roswell slides thing, but you know, an old friend of mine was Bud Hopkins, and Bud would call it stupid thinking. So this was ufology, this was abductions, this was folklore. They were all separate. This was the paranormal. Well, in reality, Kevin, they're not separate. You know, you cannot separate them. I've been to speak to witnesses. And what they were telling me, apart from the physical description of the beings they encountered, was in all essence paranormal. It was ghosts and poltergeists and all this kind of thing. But because these creatures had little big black eyes, we would lump it into a UFO encounter. But you big black eyes out of it. The rest of it, there was, you know, well, there was literally things, knockings, scratchings, bumps in the night. You would say, oh no, that's paranormal. So you can't separate it. It is all one part and parcel of the same thing.
Yeah, well, you know, if you had Don in a room with you now, he would have his truth and his research, years of research, and you would have the same as well, your years of research and your perception and truth as it is right now. And never the two will completely agree. I mean, that's just it. Nor would Stephen Greer, if you had him in a room as well. He's got a different take on it as well. But and many others.
Yeah, for me, that's an important part of the study. Because I've often quoted that if we all agreed, Kevin, you know, on whatever subject, but, you know, we'd never make any progress. I mean, if we agreed as humanity, then we'd probably all still be living in caves. We say, oh, the cave's nice and cozy and it keeps us protected. Well, I'll stay here. Oh, yeah. But we don't. And as long as we can disagree in the correct way, rather than slagging people off. I mean, I have every respect for Don. I've had him here. Sat in a room with him, and you know, Marcel Jr. I've met Kevin Randall, I've met him several times, and I've read all their written works as well. Doesn't mean I have to agree with them, because agree is not the way forward. I remember when I met Travis Walton many years back. I was hired to help promote the movie Fire in the Sky when it was released, and one of the things we did, we had Travis Walton and Mike Rogers do a presentation in London, and I was talking to Travis, you know, and I said, have you seen this book about Earthlights? Have you thought that what you might have seen about an Earthlight Well, you was sat under a big one. He said, I never knew about that. So, we discussed it. He didn't necessarily agree with me, but it was another way of looking at it. And we no need to fall out over it. It was just that perhaps, could this be? Maybe. What about this? They were all, when you interview, somebody, you say who, what, why, where, and when. Because to answer who, what, why, or when, they can't just say yes or no. They have to give you some more information. And so disagreeing, Kevin, is the way forward. It sounds stupid, really, but it's not.
No, I completely agree with you. Don't worry. Absolutely. But with Travis's case as well, I mean, he did go missing for a number of days.
Oh, absolutely. I met Mike Rogers. I met their respective wives at the time.
Did you? The wives?
No, that they are telling the truth. They're not hoaxers. They are not lying.
No.
Call it what you will. And I also met Travis out in Rome a few months later. I have an interview on tape with him that I've never published, and I played devil's advocate. From a hoax point of view, you would every hoaxer has a motive of some kind or other. So let's assume I believe that Travis was hoaxing and his colleagues. Well, where is the motive for it? And I said, I said to Travis, well, you've made a load of cash out of the movie. He says, I've made some cash. He says, next Monday, Philip, I still got to go back to work in the logging industry. He was a foreman in the logging plant. So money wasn't a motivation because he was still doing his 9-to-5 job or whatever it is he did. I don't know what his hours were. And I couldn't find any motivation as to why these people would hoax this. It just didn't exist. I'll give you another example. I read an old newspaper article that was about the era, not long after Travis' incident. A journalist, he was flying over to meet Travis, and he's saying, don't believe him, don't believe him, don't believe him, don't believe him. Now, when he got there, he was met by Travis's brother. And he said, it kind of made me laugh as well, Kevin. He says, this man was the meanest, toughest looking cowboy you could ever come across. And he said to me, I don't care whether or not you believe my brother. All I'm saying to you is you better not laugh at him. Now here's a big tough, this is Travis's big brother. If it had been a hoax, I would have expected him to say, look, but he didn't. He said, I don't care whether you believe him or not. I just don't want you laughing at him. And the guy came away after he managed to interview Travis, going back home on the plane saying, I don't believe him, but he couldn't give a reason as to why, I don't care what anybody says. I believe that Travis Walton, Mike Rogers, and his colleagues are telling the truth. And what they saw, what happened, I'll leave it for others to decide. But we also go, he's not our Travis Walton, but former police constable Alan Godfrey. Now, he's encountered in Todmorden in the late 1970s. He was on patrol in the police car. He'd been on night duty. He was actually spent the night looking for some lost cows, believe it or not. So he says, I saw, an officer on foot patrol down in the town centre. I'll take one last look for these cows, and then that's me finished. So he's driving up through the main road through Todmorden, sees this object. He stops. He can't get through on his radio, which is not uncommon in that area. He starts to draw it in his notebook. This object's like a big diamond shape with panels at the top. And it was swirling underneath. It was almost touching the road. He could see the debris on the road being dispersed. Next thing he knows, he's several hundred yards down the road, now driving the patrol car. No recollection of what happened in between. Now, Alan was regressed under hypnosis, and I've seen the hypnosis tape. I'm one of only a few to have ever viewed it, and it's scary. Now, I asked Alan about his encounter, and he said, Philip, if I'd have got out of my police car and had a brick in my hand, I could have thrown it at that thing and it would have gone clank. But as for the hypnosis, he says, you make of it what you will. I can't remember that, And I think that's to his credit. And again, I have no doubt he is telling the truth. Same with Robert Taylor at Livingston, telling the truth. It's just an interpretation of what happened.
Well, in his hypnosis, what very, very, very briefly, so was there contact made?
Absolutely. One of the first things you see is Alan, who's a tough guy, by the way. You would not have liked to have been resisting arrest when he had his uniform on. He throws his arms up across his face, almost like in an X Factor fashion, and shouts, "There's a light, there's a light, there's a light." He talks about this big bright light. And he's laying on a slab, bed, call it what you will. And then he goes, "Ugh." And they say, what's the matter? They're ugly. Who's ugly? And he describes these creatures that had heads that shaped like a light bulb and so on. And it would, I think, in real life, certainly in those days, and perhaps even now, it would take a lot to frighten Alan, you know. And like I said, I don't think you would want to resist arrest. But it was fascinating. But he just says, I cannot remember, you know, what that portion of missing time. He knows what's come out under hypnosis, but he cannot account for it. And I think that's to his credit. I really do. But you know, then you are, as a researcher, as an investigator, try and make sense of it. Now, what is an interesting thing, Kevin, my first book, and this is not a sales pitch, came out in 1994. It's called Without Consent. And it's all about missing time and abduction accounts in the UK. Alan Godfrey's in it. So is Robert Taylor from Livingston and many, many more. What I didn't publish in the book is I asked a number of these witnesses or experiencers, call them what you will, off the record, what do you think is the nature and origin of your experience? It's you that's had this experience. You tell me, you know. Some said definitely it was ET. Others thought it was spiritual. Majority of them said, don't know. One young lad blamed the Russians. He didn't really believe that. It was just his way of rationalising the experience because it terrified the living daylights out of him. And at the time, the Russians were the bad guys, therefore it must have been them. He was happy to believe that, and it allowed him to sleep at night. So even the people that have had these experiences themselves, Kevin, don't all agree, don't all know. And so how can we, as so-called impartial, independent, outside researchers, make any sense of it? It's very, very difficult indeed. And that's, I think, you know, asking them themselves. I think a lot of the interpretations for these experiences have been imposed on them by the researchers, not necessarily the people who have had this experience themselves. Go way, way back to Kenneth Arnold. I don't think Kenneth Arnold ever committed himself to what the formation of crescent-shaped objects were, you know. And a few years back, another example, I was put in touch with a wing commander who back in the 60s was in charge of the radar over the UK for military. He's now an MBE, you know, and he had top secret security classification, Kevin. And for example, when the US spy plane came into Britain to refuel, he knew about it. He was notified. And he tracked 6 UFOs on a number of radars across mainland UK, which was also tracked by civilian radar. And in his written statement to me, his Wing Commander Turner, it's not his name's not a secret, and I've met him in person, and he lectured at one of our conferences. He says, Philip, I can tell you what these things were not. And he gave a list, but as to what they were, I have no idea, you know. And he tracked them on radar, and his colleagues, you know. So it's very difficult from us on the outside looking in, even though, like yourself, Kevin, you've had a sighting. I've had a couple of little things. It's still very, very difficult.
It means nothing because you can't talk to anyone about it because there's no reference for it. So there's, you know, not much, you know, there's not many times I bring it up in conversation really because there's, you know, if no one else has ever seen anything that you've seen, then kills the conversation a little bit because it's like trying to describe something that's you've never seen or there's no reference for. So yeah, I can understand why people keep quiet about it as well because it's, you know, the subject is made to be ridiculed a little bit. Well, it has been quite a bit, even though nowadays when you see the kind of movies coming out, you know, they're the bad guys and we're the good guys, kind of thing.
As it was, Kevin, I mean, certainly when I started, there was still this taboo. But
Taboo, yeah, that's a good word. Yeah.
through the 90s, you got people like Dr. John Mack go on the record, and Nick Pope, the man from the ministry. Whether you agree with these individuals doesn't really matter. But as far as the public at large was concerned, and the media, they gave the subject sort of an air of credibility. And they did, there's no question about it. There were others, but they were the sort of the main ones, really. And what that also did was encourage people to go on the record. And more people have, of course, since then. So it's not as big a taboo as it used to be. Now, Kevin, I worked 20 plus years in a factory. And everybody in that factory knew what I did in my spare time. I've heard every alien, flying saucer, joke and jive you can think about. Doesn't bother me. My mates used to walk around with bits of wire sticking out the top of their head, making funny noises, and
Well, as long as you can laugh about it, that's all that matters. I mean, look, you've kept to what you've enjoyed, and you've never strayed from that. I mean, it's where your passion is, and that's good. And do you see future generations taking up the torch to continue the work in the ufology, or is that happening at all out there?
I don't think it is, Kevin, unless someone can tell me differently. I remember again. Must have been the early 1980s, been at a meeting in London, and myself and a few other colleagues, were branded as the next generation, and they were right, of course. I think I was sat there with about 4 or 5 people, and so I think there's 2 or 3 of us are still actively involved one way or another. And what I've tried to do down the years, one way or another, is to encourage the next generation along. And I've done that by I've edited a number of magazines. I'd asked them to write articles for us, or if they've had an encounter, we'll publish that for you. You can always keep your name out of it. It's not a problem. And I've actively tried to do that and continue to do so. Now, whether we succeed or not, I don't know. I noticed some of the latest conferences, of course. When you look on the speakers list, it's pretty much of a muchness. It's all the same old boys, and that's no disrespect to them. I've got the greatest respect for all of them, whether I agree with them or not. But I don't see the young blood coming through. I hope I'm wrong. Perhaps you'll have some, younger listeners to your radio show who think, oh, it's something I've thought about getting involved in, and maybe the time might be right, because anyone can get involved in this subject, and you can be involved in it as little or as much as you want. It's really down to you.
I think the younger people I see coming into it are coming in it from a completely different stance. They're coming in it via channeling. Now, there's a lot of younger channelers that I've come across that have come on my show as well. Not all of them, but there's I can name a few that are in contact with, they feel, distant civilizations, be it from other dimensions or other galaxies.
If you look at the subject as a whole, from 1947 to now, it has changed.
It has, and it's more of a message of
change,
benevolent brother.
Yeah, and so these youngsters that are coming through with the next generation, they may well look at it from a different, viewpoint.
Well, I think I'm just talking off the cuff. I think that's if I was to try to answer that question that I just asked you, I think that's how I would answer it, only because I get them coming my way on the type of show that I'm doing. So yeah, and you did mention at the beginning of this interview how it has shifted so much, and it's sort of gone from nuts and bolts to this. Yes, so maybe it is continuing, or will continue in a completely different way. And maybe
if you look at the speakers list, the biggest UFO conference in America is up and coming. I'm fortunate they've moved it now from Laughlin to somewhere else. But I lectured there in Laughlin. It's the International UFO Congress.
Yes, I know which one, yes. Yeah.
And you look at the speakers list, I don't think there's one of them under 40. I'm not saying anything wrong with the speakers, and it'll be fascinating, but I don't see the young blood coming through in whatever aspect, in any great numbers. And I hope I'm wrong, and there's still, time for that to change. I still hope I've got a few years left. Keeping my fingers crossed anyway.
Well, that's an important question as well for you, is what would you, I hate to ask this, I hope this is not going to feel wrong, but What would you want your legacy to be?
Well, I look upon my job, if you want to call it. It's the best word I can think of at the moment.
Well, it is, isn't it? It is your job.
UFO researcher and investigator. I hope that, when I snuff it, that I have contributed in some way to the understanding of the phenomena. I look upon it as documenting it, Kevin, documenting the subject, documenting the evidence, trying to make sense of it. And I hope that in the future, somebody will be able to look back, not just on what I've done, but what we've done collectively, and make sense of it. Because we use reports of all kinds, meteorites are a prime example. No, stones cannot land, they cannot fall from the sky, right? But had those reports gone on the record, because there was the taboo about it, then, our understanding of meteorites may have taken much longer to come along. So I look at it in that sense. I hope I can document things. And one of the things I'm doing now is, Kevin, is having my files digitized. And they will be made. It'll take a while because Steve Mira, God bless him, he's helping, he's doing it all. It's all done free. And when they're all done, they'll be made available to anybody that wants them, but they'll be there forever, hopefully.
Well, okay. That's a good. We've been putting your books up on the screen, and your website for the people listening to this just for our podcast is.
I don't really have a website as such, Kevin. I've got 2 or 3 bits and pieces, but just people want to find me on Facebook, then I'm there, Philip Mantle, and the banner on my Facebook page is Flying Disc Press, because we have a blog, and I've started publishing other people's work as well, Kevin. I'm grateful that people publish my work down the years, so I'm just trying to reciprocate in some respects. So I published I'm working on a fascinating book now from Romania, believe it or not. Absolutely. I let a friend of mine read it, and he said, Phil, this is, and he didn't really know what to say, because of the language barrier, of course. We've never heard hardly anything from it. My first book was UFOs over Poland that I published. That's on Amazon. UFOs in Romania, that should be out within a couple of months. I'm looking at a couple more things for next year as well.
Okay. Well, what we'll do is we'll definitely get you back on to talk about those books in depth, because I wanted this interview really just to be a little bit about you, to be honest, more than just the nuts and bolts reports. But I would like to get you back on again to promote those books, definitely.
I've had the pleasure of publishing them, but they're the kind of books that I would enjoyed reading. And again, Kevin, when I looked at the Polish manuscript and the Romanian one, I thought, I'd never heard of that before. There's certain things in there that even me, after all this, I've got hundreds of books that you can't see behind me. I thought, and that's one of the reasons why my interest continues.
Good.
Just when you think you've heard it all, you haven't.
No, and that's an important. In this field, you have to keep an open mind. You really have to. But isn't it fascinating? For yourself to come across new material. That's incredible. New understandings, new reportings, and different types of sightings. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
What would you say then is an important message to the audience?
I would say, Fox Mulder's saying is trust no one. Well, I would ignore that. I would say ignore everyone. Ufology is a personal subject. I'd try and say don't fall out with people. By all means disagree, but don't get involved in arguing over stupid, petty things. It's just not worth it. And one of the reasons, I'm going back on the lecture scene is because there's a well-known skeptic in the UK said earlier this year that getting involved in ufology is a waste of time. I thought, well, first and foremost, it's my time to waste. And if I want to waste it on this, then shut your face. But it made me think, Kevin. I looked back and I thought, what a lot of rubbish he's talking. My involvement, I'm just a daft lad from East Ardsley near Wakefield. No formal education. My high school was rubbish. I don't have a degree or a PhD on nothing. I class myself as self-educated once I left school. But my interest and my involvement in ufology has enlightened me no end. Has taken me both physically and mentally to places that I never would have gone without it. You know, the village that I grew up in, I love the little place. I still live close to it. You know, but you were expected to either go work down the mine, in the factory, or in the mill, or go to prison. You know, there weren't many options to you.
No.
And that's what happened to most of the lads that I grew up with. And they are the salt of the earth, don't get me wrong. This subject has taken me, and I've met people that I would never, ever have met without it. My best friend in the whole world is a Norwegian, and I met him through this subject. And we are
Isn't it great? Yeah.
today. So, you know, I would say if you want to get involved in it, do it. It's just like any other interest, but do it in the right way. And not trust no one, ignore everyone.
I love it. Well, look, Philip, I'm going to get you back on, and hopefully next time I get you back on, I'll get you on with someone else that maybe you've co-authored a book with as well, maybe, or we'll just get you back on it alone. Who knows? But there's options there. And I just want to say, just thank you so much for the contribution that you've made towards everything that you do, and just thank you for joining us today.
Hey, Kevin, it's my pleasure. It really is.
Well, we've come to an end on tonight's show. Don't forget that you can listen and watch all our past interviews on the More Show's official YouTube channel. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new daily shows. You may also find out more on all past and upcoming guests on the show via themoreshow.com, and do like us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates. So until next time, be safe.